Well, welcome in. Glad you guys are here. Last Sunday, if you were here, you know that we weren't. I wasn't. And so maybe you were upstairs. But I'm glad to be back. Glad to be recovered and no longer throwing up and sleeping on my bathroom floor. So yay that. But I wanted to actually pick up kind of right where we left off last time. We started looking at the book of Philemon. And I want to kind of give you a little bit of a story of something that happened maybe about 20 or so years ago. When we look at the world, we see wars happening all the time. Unfortunately, this world is marked by war after war, and almost we look back at certain times or certain centuries in the history of humanity, and they're often marked by these terrible rulers or these huge wars that happened. And when we think about why do some of these wars often happen, unfortunately, it's sometimes one religious group fighting to be the dominant religious group against another. And I'm not just talking about maybe some of the Moors or back in the Greek war eras, but unfortunately, even for us as Christians, we have a sad history where the Crusaders would kill people to try to have Christianity be the dominant religion of the land, of the region. And that's kind of sad to think about. And I'm sure that God's heart is often broken when he sees this. Now, there's something that happened back in 1994 in this country called Rwanda. It's in Africa, and there's this movie called Hotel Rwanda. If you have the stomach for it, maybe some of you need to watch it with your parents or watch it when you're a little bit older, but it tells this gruesome story of what happened back in 1994 in Rwanda. And I'll give you a little bit of a picture. In the span of 100 days, 800,000 people were killed. 100 days, 800,000 people. I can't even imagine, it's hard for me to even picture that many people. And then to picture a war that happened in such a short amount of time that killed 800,000 people and displaced over 2 million people. And this war happened between these two groups of people in Rwanda, the Hutus and the Tutsis. And here's the craziest part. 90% of Rwanda is Christian. 90% of Rwanda is Christian. And yet all of this was happening. And one missionary, one guy who was living there and working there for an organization called InterVarsity, when he was being asked about what was going on, he said, you know what's crazy is that people here who are Christians, they'll often preach about loving God. But what they won't often preach about is loving one another. That so often the focus is to think about your relationship with God, but is so often missed, especially in this day and age, and what was happening particularly in Rwanda when all this massacre was happening was that even though they were all Christians, they didn't see that if you love God, that has to go hand in hand with loving one another. And last week we started looking at the book of Philemon, this super short little book in the New Testament where Paul is writing this letter to a man named Philemon whose slave Onesimus ran away. And I had each of you pull out a paperclip. You had a little paperclip under you, and you straightened it out as much as you can. And then I asked you, can you put that paperclip back? Can you make it look exactly the same as you had it before? I wish I had mine to pull it out and show you, but I forgot to bring it. But that little paperclip, what we noticed is that no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't get the paperclip to look exactly the same as it originally was. We talked about how that is actually what sin does to our relationships. It makes them all twisted up and broken so that they can't ever be perfect again. And we talked about how some of us, depending on maybe how we grew up or our personality or how we've dealt with conflict, some of us, when we see our broken, messed up paperclip, what we do is maybe some of us throw it away. Say, you know what, I'm not going to deal with that anymore. I'm going to start with a new friendship. Or maybe I sweep up the rug, I open up the rug and brush it underneath the rug and leave it there and hope maybe one day it'll come back out looking normal again. But realistically, that doesn't change it. That doesn't make it better. And so we're looking at, well, what does God want to teach us about relationships? How can we learn from this book of Philemon? And what we see is that following Jesus doesn't just mean changing what we believe, but it also is changing how we live our lives, how we live towards other people. And we saw Paul reaching out to this guy Philemon and saying, hey, Philemon, I know that there's an issue between you and Onesimus, and we got to figure this out. And Paul had the authority to say, you're doing something wrong, you better change right now, otherwise I, as the authority figure, you're going to regret this. But instead of doing that, what we saw last week is he appealed with him out of love. He said, rather than me telling you what to do, I'm going to appeal to you based on the love of Christ. I want you to make this decision because you love Jesus rather than because the church leader told you to. So we're going to pick up right where we left off 2 weeks ago, verse 11, and we're going to read through verse 14. Stick with me here. I got this. You got this. We got this. We're going to read. Maybe we'll make a few mistakes, but let's see where we go. All right, verse 11. So this is Paul speaking. He says, formerly he was useless to you. Talking about Onesimus. We're going to get to that. What does useless mean? He was useless to you, but now he has become useful to both you and to me. I am sending him who is my very heart back to you. I would have liked to keep him here with me so that he could take your place in helping me while I'm in chains for the gospel, but I did not want to do anything without your consent, so that any favor you do would not seem forced, but would be voluntary. All right, two things that I want to talk about this morning. I think I have a little, let's see if this thing works. Oh yeah, here we go. Okay, two things I want to talk about. First thing we want to talk about, we're calling far away fruit. And the second thing I want to talk about is called forced fruit. We're going to look at how this passage is going to talk about far away fruit, and is going to talk about forced fruit. First thing we see. Last week, we mentioned Paul was in chains. He was limited in what he could do. He was not able to go out from house arrest where he was. And so when Onesimus came, he actually helped him a lot with his ministry to reach others, to share the gospel with them. And Onesimus was one of the guys who actually heard the gospel from Paul and was converted. And so when we look back at this passage where he says he was at one point useless to you, but now he's useful to both of us, look at this. What does it mean that he was useless to you, but now he's useful to both of us? Well, when Onesimus ran away, he became useless to his master because he couldn't serve him anymore. His master couldn't tell him what to do because he was gone. And now, he can be useful to both of them. How can he be useful to both of them? Well, Philemon, we talked about this last week a little. Philemon also came to Jesus because of Paul. Paul shared the gospel with him, and he got to know who Jesus is. And now, Onesimus got to know who Jesus is. Now he's also following Jesus. And so as Paul is talking to Philemon, he says, he can be useful to both of us because even though you're far away, even though you're a couple 100 miles away from me, you can still be useful to me through Onesimus. How Onesimus is helping me share the gospel, minister to other people around me is so helpful. And even though you're busy, Philemon has a family, he's got a wife and a kid most likely, he's got a business, he's got people that he's serving. He's actually serving people in his community. And so he can't come all the way to Paul and serve him. And so by Onesimus, his servant, being there with Paul, vicariously through Onesimus, his servant, Philemon is being helpful, and he is now useful to both of them. Even though Philemon couldn't put himself be there to serve, he would love to be there to serve. He would love to help his friend Paul. But instead, he's having Onesimus serve Paul. And so now he can be useful to both of them. Uh, this past summer, some of you were with us, some of you saw pictures, but this past summer, we were in, I don't know if I have a picture, maybe it didn't come up, but last summer, we were in Egypt. I had a picture of Egypt, and you can just look it up later on Instagram. We were in Egypt, and we got to serve a lot of people. We got to serve people from all different kind of backgrounds, poverty-stricken, people who are in ministry, people who can't really get to church because of some of the physical illnesses that they have. But we got to see and serve so many people. But we can't be there all the time, can we? And some of us actually, maybe God is putting it on our hearts to go and serve. Some of us, maybe God is calling us to serve somewhere else. Maybe there is not the place where he wants us to go. But can we still help? Maybe that question of, can I still help people there? Can I still serve somehow, some way? And the answer is yes, we can. When we look at what's happening in this story with Onesimus and Philemon would love to serve Paul, but he's got stuff going on at home. A lot of you guys, maybe you would love to serve the people in Egypt that we got to serve this summer. But you've got school, you've got work, you've got a family, you've got jobs, you've got a lot to take care of here. And so you actually can't go there at the moment and serve. But how can I still serve? Is there any way that I can have far away fruit? And the answer is yes. I don't know if you guys know this, but part of our tithes every month when we collect the offerings at the end of the service goes towards serving some of these people who are on home base in Egypt or in other parts of the world, in Iraq or in places that maybe I'm not even allowed to say for their own safety. Do you know that we can bear far away fruit through our finances or through our prayer or through sometimes going and visiting and serving alongside them? Most of us can't be there all the time. Most of us can't always be serving in the faraway places, but can we still be part of the fruit that comes out because of those ministries over there? Yeah, we can. And I encourage you to be part of that. If that's not something that you're used to doing or regularly doing, I want to encourage you to think, wow, the tithes that I give can bear fruit, not just here locally, but globally all around the world. That our church is partnered with some of these ministries, just like Philemon could have been partnered with Paul, even though he couldn't physically be there. Rachel's grandparents, when we would go visit them in Vermont, when they were still living in Vermont, they had their kitchen, they had this really old kitchen. They never did anything to renovate, which is cool, but they had this really old kitchen, and on this wall on the kitchen, they had all these pictures of these families. So I would ask Grandpa Ray and Grandma Ruth, who are all these people? And they would say, these are all of the missionaries that we're supporting. And they had at least a dozen families there on their wall who they were praying for and sending money to because they believed in what they were doing. And they couldn't be in the Congo. They went to the Congo and they served there for a couple of years, but they couldn't be there their whole lives. And so they're sending money to support missionaries in the Congo, to share the gospel, to help those who are sick. I wonder if you and I want to be part of something like that. If we want to think, okay, maybe I'm making a little bit of money, maybe part of my my bank account can go towards not just me or what I need or what I want. Can I serve so that I can be part of far away fruit? Can I be part of a mission that God has us on that is just outside of just me? So that's the first thing that I think we can see from this passage. So let's keep going. Let's go to verses 12 and 13. He's saying this, I'm sending him who is my very heart back to you. I would have liked to keep him with me so that he could take your place in helping me when I was in chains for the gospel. When Paul says my very heart here, when he's saying, Onesimus, I'm sending him back, my very heart, this is this deep word in the original language that actually means like my insides, my bowels, like like this deep part of me. He loves Onesimus. He's gotten to love him. He's gotten to serve next to him. And so by him saying, I'm going to send him back, he's almost saying, I'm sending part of me back to you. I'm sending this deeply loved part of me back to you. It's almost like I don't want to, but I'm choosing to. Why is he choosing to do that? Why is he sending part of him back? Well, let's keep reading. He says this, I did not want to do anything without your consent, so that any favor you do would not seem forced, but would be voluntary. Why, Paul? Why are you sending him back? Why are you choosing to send him back rather than, if he's been so useful to you, why don't you just keep him along? Why don't you just keep him by your side? What Paul's doing is that he's friends with Philemon. Just because he's an authority figure, just because he's an apostle, just because he's got leadership, is not going to make him say, you know what, even though you're my friend, I'm going to do what I want without asking you. I'm going to send him back, and I want you to choose. I want you to decide how you're going to handle this situation. What are you going to choose to do? And this sends us to our second point. First, we talked about faraway fruit. Our second point is forced fruit. Paul is sending Onesimus back to Philemon because he doesn't want to see forced fruit. He doesn't want Philemon to just do something, to just do the right thing because a leader told him to. Just because the pastor or the parent or the Sunday school teacher or the youth leader told him to. He wants him to make a decision that is not forced, but comes out of love. As Christians, we are like a tree. We're like a tree. In Psalm chapter 1, it says, that person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaves do not wither. Whatever they do prospers. If we're like a tree and we're planted by water, a tree, if it's healthy and it's rooted, what it's going to do is it's going to produce fruit. That is what a tree is supposed to do. It's supposed to produce fruit. And if we are like this tree, and have you ever been to apple picking, right? Some of us have been apple picking. Have you ever been apple picking and see the farmer at the apple picking place with a stick going up to each tree and just smacking with the tree and be like, produce fruit, produce fruit. Have you ever seen them do that? No. Have you ever heard a tree just like just verbally making noises, like really trying really hard, like, fruit? You ever heard it? I haven't heard a tree ever do that. And I haven't ever seen a farmer going to a tree and trying to smack the fruit out of it. That's just, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Fruit can't be forced like that. Fruit is supposed to grow naturally. A tree is supposed to produce fruit when it is healthy. One time recently, when Rachel and I, there's this apple tree at Gordon. And about a month ago, I was like, oh, look, there's apples on this tree. And I went to pick, they're all super green and really small. I was like, I really want to try it. So I picked one of these off, and I took a bite into it. And I was just immediately just spit it out because it was nasty. It tasted so bad. Why? Because I tried to force this fruit to be ready to eat. I tried to force this tree to give me a fruit, but it wasn't ready. It wasn't right. I was forcing it even though it's not ready. Sometimes we produce fruit, quote unquote, because somebody's told us to. But maybe that fruit isn't healthy. Maybe that fruit isn't going to be long lasting. Maybe that fruit is going to do more harm than good. It's going to create bitterness. When I bit into the apple, it was bitter because it wasn't ready. It was forced fruit. And what Paul wants to do here is that he wants Philemon to produce fruit out of his heart, out of the roots that he's in. If we remember 2 weeks ago, he said, I'm not appealing to you. I'm not going to tell you to do this because of my authority. I'm going to appeal to you out of love, out of the love that you have for Jesus, out of the love that you've heard the gospel, so because of that, you want to produce fruit. You want to produce healthy fruit. Now, what does that not mean? I want to just clarify, right? What does that not mean? It doesn't mean that we can just say, okay, I'm a Christian, but I'm going to wait as long as I want to produce fruit because I'm not ready yet. That's not how it works. Jesus in John chapter 15, he says this. He says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. Now hear this part. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. What's Jesus saying? He's saying that if you say that you are part of me, if you are following me, Jesus, then you should be bearing fruit. If we think back to the story about Rwanda, you can't just have a relationship with God and be in a good place with God without having a good relationship with other people. Because what happens, then you can think, okay, I have a good relationship with God, but here's 800,000 people that we just killed because we're only focused on our relationship with God. No, God, if you are in God, if you are walking with Jesus, there should be fruit in your life. That is part of what happens. And so maybe there's somebody who's, you've sinned against somebody. You've hurt a relationship with somebody, or somebody's hurt you. What are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to just peel back the carpet and throw that relationship under and never look back at it? Or is there something that maybe God is calling us to do? Maybe Paul is speaking to Philemon here and encouraging him to fix a broken relationship. In Ephesians 4, chapter 4, verse 26, Paul encourages his readers and says this, do not let the sun go down on your head while you are still angry. It says if there's an issue between you and someone else around you, can you fix that issue? Is that something that we can talk about? Don't let that be something that lingers and creates bitterness. But let's resolve the issues that we have. I can't just say, I'm not going to produce any fruit. I can't just say forever, for weeks and months and years, that I'm not going to produce fruit in this relationship because of something that happened. No, what I think God is calling us to is He's calling us to mend those relationships. Next week, we're going to look a little bit more at that as we close out Philemon. But are we just leaving that to the side, those relationships to the side? Or are we taking action and producing fruit out of the love that we have, out of the love that we've seen Jesus give to us? Paul is calling Philemon to love, to forgive, to accept, to welcome home this friend of Paul's, Onesimus, and not just let it go by the wayside. But he doesn't want forced fruit. In the same way, I think Jesus doesn't want your life to be marked by forced fruit. He wants your life to be marked by fruit that comes from Him. Like if we go back to the tree analogy, if we're all these trees and our roots are dug deep in who Jesus is, that's the most nutritious health food we can find for our lives. And so if we're rooted in Him, we should be producing much fruit. Our relationships shouldn't be marked by hate or bitterness or unforgiveness, but they should be marked by love and forgiveness and unity as Jesus calls us in the Scriptures. So I want to ask you, in your relationships this week, if you look at this coming week for you, is there a relationship with someone in your life that needs to be worked on? Do you feel like you're investing in the roots of your life so that you can be producing fruit that's not just forced, that I'm not just doing this because my parents say so or my family says so or the pastor says so, or am I really digging deep to get the nutrients out of Jesus, out of my relationship with God, and produce fruit? One thing that we're going to do this morning is we're going to share communion. And Gogs, if you'd come around and just pass these around, I'm going to take one. I think this is going to be really special this morning because it's going to remind us of these 2 points that we've talked about faraway fruit and forced fruit. When we take communion together, we're not just taking it here as the community in West Roxbury at this Lighthouse Arabic church. When we take communion together, we're doing this with all other Christians all around the world. This is something that can remind us that we're not alone, that our faith, that our Christian relationships aren't limited to just the people in this room. But in fact, this is something that we all do. Christians here, Christians in Rwanda, Christians in the Congo, Christians in Egypt, Christians in West Roxbury. We are all united together in Jesus. We are all sitting around the table with Jesus. Even if they're so far away, even if we're sending them finances and supporting their ministries hundreds and thousands of miles away, we can still remember that we are united, sitting at the same table together. And the second thing that this reminds us of is at this table with Jesus, at this table where we have this communion together, everyone who confesses their faith in Jesus sits at this table. Even the person that I'm upset with, even the person that has maybe hurt me, even the person that, man, I don't know if I can sit at a table with them. Do you know what they've said about me? They know what they've done to me. I don't know if I can sit at a table with them. But Jesus welcomes all of us to the table. He wants us to come with a grateful heart. Because first we want to focus on Him. We're not focusing on me. We're not focusing on the person next to me. First we're focusing on Him. What He's done. We're going to read in 1 Corinthians 11 that this is a remembrance of what He's done. But we can't just sit at a table and ignore the people around us. We sit at this table, especially back in this time when Jesus was having this first Last Supper. When you have a meal with somebody, it means that you're friends with them. It means that it's not just some rando. No, we're a family. And so when we sit at a table together, when we have communion together, we're grateful for what He's done, but we're also repentant. Our gratitude leads us to repent, to look back at our week, to look back at our life and say, wow, man, maybe Jesus, I want to come clean to You this morning. You're right, I haven't done everything according to how You've called me to do it this week. Can You lead me to repentance? Can You forgive me of my sin? Can You forgive me of the way that I've treated that person? And then, from gratitude to repentance, we go forward in obedience. God, I'm going to move from this place in obedience to You. You have washed me white as snow, and now I want to walk in step with You, to hear from You and live for You. So you can peel back that first layer here. The Lord Jesus, on the night when He was betrayed, took bread. And when He had given thanks, He broke it and said, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of Me." Let's take this bread. In the same way, also He took the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in My blood. Do this as often as you drink in remembrance of Me."